What if all the money in your savings account became worthless overnight? This is not a fictional scenario, it is an ominous historical fact. Look back at the Weimar Republic in 1923. Hyperinflation wreaked such havoc that paper banknotes became useless, and people had to use wheelbarrows full of cash just to pay basic bills like rent. At the epicenter of that collapse, an industrial tycoon named Yugo Stennis rose to become the richest man in Germany. He executed a strategy that was both bold and brutal: maximum financial leverage. He borrowed enormous sums of debt in the depreciating currency and immediately converted that money into owning real assets: coal mines, factories, and large real estate holdings. When the German mark completely collapsed, falling into a state of worthlessness, his debts vanished along with it. At the same time, the value denominated in money, the nominal value of the tangible assets he held, skyrocketed. It is a chilling and counterintuitive lesson from the past. In the death of a currency, real estate can simultaneously forge fortunes and unleash chaos. This raises a critical question for our time. What would happen to the American housing market if the US dollar were to collapse? History offers a clear and repeating pattern. In Germany's hyperinflation, the mark fell so precipitously that by late 1923, virtually all private debts, including mortgages, were wiped out in real terms. Borrowers could pay off their homes with a handful of notes that weeks earlier might have bought a loaf of bread. Lenders and savers, the prudent backbone of the economy, were utterly ruined. More recently, nations like Zimbabwe and Argentina have endured their own episodes of monetary collapse. During Zimbabwe's hyperinflation in 2008, where prices were doubling daily, citizens desperately converted their cash into anything tangible: land, cattle, and houses as quickly as humanly possible. Real estate became the last refuge for value when the Zimbabwean dollar became worthless confetti. In Argentina, where high inflation is a chronic condition, it is common to see property priced not in the unstable local peso, but in US dollars, a desperate attempt to anchor to some form of stability. When a currency collapses, hard assets become king. The United States has so far avoided this fate, but an outright dollar collapse is no longer a far-fetched thought experiment. It would likely be triggered by a perfect storm, a catastrophic loss of confidence driven by unchecked money printing, a geopolitical shock, and a national debt that has become mathematically impossible to repay. The US government's debt now exceeds $37 trillion. The annual interest payments on that debt have surpassed the entire defense budget. History teaches us that when debt loads reach this terminal stage, empires face a stark choice: default on their obligations or devalue their currency. The United States would almost certainly choose the path of inflation. In such a scenario, a devastating chain reaction would be unleashed upon the housing market. First, inflation would surge to catastrophic levels as the dollar's purchasing power plummets. Next, interest rates would spike dramatically as the Federal Reserve makes a desperate attempt to regain control, and as lenders demand enormous returns to compensate for the currency's collapse. We have seen a mild version of this in recent years, but in a true collapse, the effect would be magnified 1,000 times over. Mortgage rates in the double digits would make borrowing for a home all but impossible. Credit, the lifeblood of the modern housing market, would evaporate. Banks, fearing they would be repaid in worthless currency, would simply stop making long-term loans. The market would freeze. At the same time, new construction would grind to a halt. The cost of building materials and labour would skyrocket daily. Fewer new houses being built means an already tight housing supply becomes a state of permanent scarcity. And this scarcity would create a bizarre paradox. Even as the broader economy disintegrates, the nominal price of existing homes would explode. Houses would become the new gold, the ultimate store of wealth for those desperate to escape the melting ice cube of the dollar. Nominal home prices would skyrocket simply because each dollar is worth less every day. We would witness an affordability crisis of unimaginable proportions. Even as the paper value of a suburban home soars into the millions or billions of worthless dollars, the housing market's true value signal would be completely shattered by a broken currency. In this great economic sorting, there would be clear winners and losers. The undisputed winners would be existing homeowners with long-term fixed-rate mortgages. If you hold a 30-year fixed mortgage at a low interest rate, a wave of hyperinflation will effectively annihilate your debt. Every future mortgage payment would be made with dollars that are worth significantly less than the ones you borrowed. In historical hyperinflations, this process literally erased entire mortgage debts. In a US collapse, a homeowner with a fixed loan could potentially pay off their entire house with a single wildly inflated weekly paycheck. They would be left holding a real tangible asset free and clear while their lender is repaid with a pittance of real value. In this inverted world, debtors win and creditors lose. The losers, however, would be numerous. Homeowners with variable interest rate mortgages would be in grave danger. As the Fed hikes rates to fight the collapse, their payments would spike to unbearable levels, likely leading to mass defaults. Renters would face a nightmare scenario. With no hard assets to protect them, they would be the biggest losers. Landlords facing their own exploding costs would be forced to raise rents aggressively, perhaps resetting them monthly or even weekly. Unless wages could keep pace, which they historically do not, the cost of shelter would become unsustainable for millions. Government-imposed rent controls would likely backfire, causing landlords to abandon their properties as the rental income becomes worthless, leading to a collapse in the available housing stock and urban blight. And the banks, the very institutions that hold these mortgage assets, would be wiped out. They would be paid back in worthless currency, triggering a systemic banking crisis that would cascade through the global economy. The hidden mechanism driving this brutal redistribution is a phenomenon economists call inflation-induced debt destruction. High inflation is a silent, invisible transfer of wealth from lenders to borrowers. If you borrow $300,000 today to buy a house, and by next year the dollar has lost 90% of its value, it is as if your mortgage principal has been effectively reduced to $30,000 in today's money. You are literally repaying the bank with cheaper money. During Germany's hyperinflation, this process was so rapid and total that entire multi-generational family debts were eliminated. This is the great counterintuitive twist. In a currency collapse, debt turns to dust. Owing money in the old, stronger currency becomes a winning position. Having savings, meanwhile, is catastrophic. Cash is poison. The prudent saver is punished, and the leveraged debtor is rewarded. The entire moral and economic logic of our society is turned completely upside down. However, it is not a simple get-out-of-jail-free card. To benefit, you must maintain ownership of the asset. If you lose your job in the chaos and cannot make even the small nominal payments, you could still face foreclosure. And importantly, this mechanism only works for fixed-rate debt. If your loan is adjustable, the interest rate could be raised so high that it bankrupts you long before inflation can save you. In the face of such a crisis, the US government would not sit idle. We could expect a raft of emergency measures, price controls, perhaps capping mortgage rates or freezing rents as was done during World War II. But such interventions often have disastrous side effects, leading to shortages and black markets. Historically, currency collapses only end when the old broken currency is replaced. The United States might be forced to create a new dollar, perhaps repegging it to a hard asset like gold. In 1923, Germany introduced the Rentenmark, a new currency backed by land and industrial assets to halt its hyperinflation. In a future US collapse, one can imagine a plan where each new dollar is worth 100 of the old worthless ones, its value anchored by the nation's real estate and productive capacity. This would also create a new paradox. If the dollar collapses relative to other world currencies, like the euro or the yuan, holders of those currencies could swoop in and buy American real estate at what would be fire sale prices. Your house might be nominally worth a fortune, but you could lose it because a foreigner can pay a price you cannot match in a currency that still holds value. Is a sudden, dramatic dollar collapse likely? Most mainstream economists would say no. The dollar is too deeply entrenched as the world's reserve currency. What is far more likely is a slow erosion, a steady grinding inflation that subtly devalues the currency over years, not days. This process, sometimes called financial repression, is already at work. In the past few years, US inflation has run far above the interest rates on many people's mortgages, effectively giving those homeowners a free gain in equity as their real debt burden shrinks. A mild version of the collapse mechanism has been in play, just in slow motion. Whether we ever face the acute crisis of our thought experiment, studying this extreme scenario illuminates the hidden gears of our financial system. Ultimately, a house derives its value from being a physical shelter in the real world. If the monetary yardstick we use to measure it breaks, the house is still there. Its value will simply be recalibrated in whatever new terms emerge. Real estate tends to survive currency failures. It is the people and the institutions around it that may not. Owning a home in such a crisis would be a lifeboat in a hurricane, better than being in the water, but you are still in the storm. The thought experiment of a dollar collapse is a stark reminder of why stable money is the bedrock of a healthy society, and it reveals that understanding how the system truly works is in itself a form of currency that can never be devalued. If this strategic analysis has provided you with a new framework for understanding risk, signal your support, engage the like button, subscribe for future briefings, and contribute your own intelligence in the comments below.